The room is cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from winter air or broken heating, but the kind that settles into your bones when you stand in a place where history turned on itself. The walls here have heard things. Whispers of strategy. Outbursts of rage. The clatter of metals against starched uniforms. And somewhere in the echo of these halls, the voice of a man who believed he was destined for greatness, no matter the cost. His name was George Smith Patton, Jr. And if you asked him, he would tell you he had lived before. Not once but many times. A Roman legionnaire. A Greek warrior. A knight in the Crusades. He believed this with the certainty that most men reserve for the color of the sky. To him, war was not just duty. It was poetry. It was art. It was the only truth that mattered. But here is the question that haunts the corridors of history. Was Patton a genius born for battle? Or was he a man consumed by something darker? Something that whispered to him in the dead of night, telling him he was more than human, more than mortal, more than the laws that governed other men? This is not a story about a hero. It is not a story about a villain. It is a story about power. And what happens when a man decides that nothing, not friendship, not decency, not even the lives of the men who follow him, will stand between him and the glory he believes he deserves? Because George Patton did not simply want to win wars. He wanted to be remembered forever. And he was willing to burn everything to make that happen. The year is 1943. The world is on fire. Europe bleeds under the weight of tanks and terror. The Pacific drowns in the clash of empires. And in North Africa, under a sun that bakes the sand into glass, American soldiers are learning what it means to fight a modern war. They are young. Many have never left their hometowns before. They carry rifles that feel too heavy and wear helmets that do not fit quite right. They write letters home that their mothers will keep in shoeboxes, letters that speak of heat and fear and a longing for anything familiar. And into this chaos steps a man in a polished helmet, ivory-handled revolvers on his hips, a scarf knotted around his neck like some ancient conqueror. He does not walk. He strides. His voice cuts through the desert wind like a blade. When he speaks, men straighten their spines without thinking. When he looks at you, it feels like he is seeing something beyond your skin, beyond your name, into the part of you that either fights or runs. Patton did not arrive to comfort these men. He arrived to transform them. And transformation, as history teaches us, is rarely gentle. He believed in reincarnation. Truly believed it. He would stand on ancient battlefields in Europe and describe, in eerie detail, skirmishes that took place centuries before, claiming he had been there. His eyes would glaze over, and he would point to hills and rivers, speaking of flanking maneuvers and fallen comrades as if remembering last week, not last millennium. His staff did not know whether to be inspired or disturbed. But they knew one thing. Patton was not like other generals. He did not see war as a necessary evil. He saw it as the highest calling, the only test of a man's soul. And so he pushed. He demanded speed, aggression, ruthlessness. While other commanders planned cautiously, weighing risks and resources, Patton screamed for movement. Forward. Always forward. Rest was weakness. Hesitation was betrayal. He would slap the side of a tank and call it a warhorse. He would recite poetry before battle, his voice rising over the rumble of engines, Shakespeare and ancient epics spilling from his mouth like prayers. But power is a strange companion. It does not sit quietly. It grows. It whispers. It tells you that the rules are for smaller men. And Patton, for all his brilliance, began to listen. There was an incident. A hospital in Sicily. 2 separate occasions, actually. Soldiers suffering from what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, but what Patton saw as cowardice. He walked through the rows of wounded men, his boots echoing on the tile floor. And when he came to a young private, shaking and staring at nothing, Patton's face twisted. He called the boy a coward. He struck him. Not once but twice. The crack of his hand across the soldier's face was heard by nurses, by doctors, by other wounded men who could not believe what they were seeing. Word spread. The press got hold of it. The public was horrified. Here was a general, a man trusted with the lives of thousands, using violence not against the enemy but against his own traumatized troops. Eisenhower, Patton's superior and once his friend, was forced to act. Patton was reprimanded, sidelined, made to apologize. And for a man who believed he was destined to lead armies into legend, this was a humiliation worse than any battlefield defeat. But here is where the story deepens. Because Patton did not learn caution from this. He did not soften. Instead, something inside him hardened. He became convinced that smaller men, weaker men, men who did not understand the purity of war were holding him back. And when the opportunity came to prove himself again, He seized it with a ferocity that would define the final chapter of his life. The landscape of Europe in 1944 is a study in contrasts. There are fields that once grew wheat, now churned into mud by the treads of 10,000 tanks. There are villages that stood for centuries, reduced to rubble in an afternoon. There are forests where children played, now hiding machine gun nests and landmines. This is the theater into which the Allied forces pour, a great tide of men and metal aimed at the heart of Nazi Germany. And among the commanders there is competition. Not just against the enemy but against each other. Montgomery, the British general, meticulous and cautious, favoring concentrated strikes and careful supply lines. Bradley, steady and reliable, the American commander who plans with patience and precision. And then there is Patton, unleashed once more, given the Third Army and told to push east. He does not push. He explodes. His tanks move faster than anyone thought possible. Supply officers tear their hair out trying to keep up. Patton does not care about logistics. He cares about speed. About striking before the enemy can breathe. His philosophy is simple. The enemy is just as tired, just as scared. But if you hit them before they expect it, if you move like lightning, they will break. And they do. Town after town falls. The Third Army advances so quickly that maps become outdated within hours. But fuel is limited. Ammunition is limited. And Montgomery, pushing north, also needs supplies. Eisenhower must choose. A choice that should be strategic, rational, based on cold calculation of objectives and resources. But Patton makes it personal. He begs. He argues. He insists that he can end the war in weeks if only given the fuel. When told no, when resources are diverted to Montgomery's Operation Market Garden, Patton is livid. He sees it as politics, as jealousy, as smaller men sabotaging greatness. And so he does something extraordinary, something that reveals the depths of his ambition. He orders his supply officers to, in his words, acquire fuel by any means necessary. Units are told to beg, borrow, or steal from other divisions. Patton's tanks drink fuel meant for other operations. He does not ask permission. He simply takes. Because in his mind, his success is more important than anyone else's. His glory justifies any method. The Third Army continues to roar forward. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of miles covered. Thousands of enemy soldiers captured. Patton stands in liberated French towns and accepts the cheers of civilians like a conquering Caesar. He writes letters describing his campaigns in terms usually reserved for poetry or scripture. He is not just winning battles. He is fulfilling destiny. But there is a cost. Always there is a cost. The winter of 1944 descends on Europe like an executioner's blade. Snow blankets the Ardennes forest, a dense tangle of trees and hills along the German border. American forces, stretched thin after months of rapid advance, hold a quiet sector here. They expect little action. Christmas is coming. Letters from home speak of hope that the war might end soon. Soldiers huddle in foxholes trying to stay warm, trading cigarettes and stories. And then, on the morning of December 16th, the world erupts. German artillery shatters the frozen silence. Panzers, hidden and massed in secret, pour through the snow. Hitler has launched a massive counteroffensive, betting everything on one desperate strike to split the Allied armies and recapture Antwerp. It is audacious. It is unexpected. And it is devastatingly effective. American lines crumble. Units are surrounded. Communication breaks down. Panic spreads. This is the Battle of the Bulge, and in the first days it looks like disaster. Eisenhower calls his commanders together. The room is tense. Maps are spread showing German penetration deep into Allied territory. The question is simple. Who can respond? Who can move fast enough to stop this? And Patton, sitting with that familiar gleam in his eye, says he can. Not in weeks. Not in days. In 72 hours. He will disengage his entire Third Army, wheel them 90 degrees north and strike the German flank. It sounds impossible. Armies do not pivot like that. The logistics alone, moving hundreds of thousands of men and vehicles through winter roads, should take weeks of planning. Patton says he will do it in 3 days. Some in the room think he is bluffing. Others think he is mad. But Eisenhower, desperate, tells him to do it. And Patton does. He has already prepared. Before the meeting, sensing an opportunity, he had his staff draw up contingency plans. 3 different scenarios for attacking north, each ready to execute. He did not wait for orders. He anticipated them. Because Patton understood something fundamental about power. That the bold are rewarded. That audacity creates its own permission. The Third Army moves. Through snow and ice, through exhaustion and freezing temperatures they move. Patton drives among them in his jeep, standing when he should sit, exposing himself to cold and danger, his face set in an expression that is part fury, part exultation. Soldiers see him and find strength they did not know they had. Tank crews push engines beyond safe limits. Supply trucks drive through the night without headlights to avoid enemy planes. And they arrive. Exactly when Patton said they would. The German advance, so confident in its early success, suddenly finds itself attacked from the side. The siege of Bastogne, where American paratroopers are surrounded and desperate, is broken. Patton's forces smash into the German flank like a hammer into glass. The tide turns. This is Patton's finest moment. The moment that justifies in his mind and in the minds of many, every excess, every outburst, every rule bent or broken. Because here, when it mattered most, his relentless drive for speed and aggression saved thousands of lives and stopped a German offensive that could have changed the course of the war. But even in triumph there is shadow. Because Patton does not see this as teamwork. He sees it as his victory. He gives interviews describing his genius. He dismisses the contributions of others. When reporters ask about the brave paratroopers at Bastogne who held the line until relief came, Patton speaks instead of his own tactical brilliance. The men who fought and died are, to him, instruments, pieces on a board that he moved with mastery. And this is where we must pause and ask a harder question. Can we admire the skill while condemning the pride? Can we celebrate the outcome while mourning the cost? Because Patton's soldiers loved him and hated him, often at the same time. They followed him into hell because they believed he would lead them to victory. But they also knew he would spend their lives without hesitation if it meant achieving his goal. There is a letter written by a young lieutenant in the Third Army, sent home to his wife 3 days before he was killed in a skirmish that Patton ordered despite reports that the position had already been abandoned by the enemy. The lieutenant writes that he is tired. That he does not know why they are still pushing so hard when the war already feels won. He writes that Patton visited their unit and gave a speech about glory and history. And then he writes something that cuts to the bone. He says, "I think the general loves war more than he loves us." That letter survives. The lieutenant does not. As winter gives way to spring in 1945, the end is near. Germany is collapsing. Cities burn. The Nazi regime, so confident in its 1,000-year reign, crumbles under the weight of its own atrocities and the unstoppable advance of Allied armies from west and east. Patton's Third Army races deeper into German territory. They are no longer just fighting. They are pursuing. Chasing a broken enemy across rivers and through towns that surrender without firing a shot. And Patton is restless. Because peace is coming. And for a man who defines himself through war, peace is a kind of death. He begins to speak recklessly. At meetings, he suggests that the Allies should not stop at Germany. That they should continue east. That the real enemy is not the defeated Nazis but the Soviets. He talks of rearming German units and using them to fight the Russians. His staff listens in stunned silence. His superiors are horrified. This is not strategy. This is obsession. Patton cannot let go of the war because the war is all he has. Without it, he is just another aging general facing retirement and irrelevance. With it, he is eternal. A warrior god from his own mythology. He is reassigned. Given administrative duties. Told to oversee the occupation of Bavaria. It is a demotion, though not officially called one. Patton chafes at the bureaucracy. At the politics. At having to deal with refugees and rebuilding instead of battle and conquest. He makes inflammatory statements about the Nazi Party, suggesting that membership was often just political necessity, that former Nazis should be allowed to return to positions of power to help rebuild. The press seizes on this. The public is outraged. How can a general, having just defeated fascism, show such leniency? Reprimands him again. Removes him from even the administrative post. Patton is sent to command a skeletal staff, a ceremonial position with no real power. For a man who believed himself destined to be remembered alongside Alexander and Caesar, this is unbearable. He writes in his diary. The entries are bitter. He speaks of betrayal. Of lesser men who do not understand. Of a world that has no place for warriors in peacetime. He is 60 years old. His body aches. The injuries from a lifetime of riding and fighting catch up to him. But his mind, his restless, hungry mind, still sees battlefields. Still plans campaigns. Still hears the drums of war that no one else can hear. And then, on a cold December day in 1945, just months after the war's end, Patton goes hunting. It is a routine trip. He sits in the back of a staff car, driven by a young private, discussing the game they hope to find. The roads are icy. The truck pulls out. There is a collision. Not violent. Not fast. The kind of accident that happens every day and leaves people shaken but unharmed. Except Patton. He is thrown forward. His neck strikes something, the seat in front of him perhaps, or the roof. When he is pulled from the wreckage, he cannot move. His body is paralyzed from the neck down. He is taken to a hospital. The doctors do what they can, but this is 1945 and spinal injuries are beyond their ability to repair. Patton lies in a hospital bed, the great warrior reduced to immobility. He can still speak, still think, and he knows. He knows he will not recover. Visitors come. Old friends. Fellow officers. They try to be hopeful, but Patton sees through it. He makes jokes, dark humor about dying in such an ordinary way. Shot at countless times, survived battles that killed thousands, only to be felled by a car accident on a quiet road. He dies 12 days later. December 21st, 1945. The official cause is a pulmonary embolism. His body, so long held together by sheer will, finally surrenders. The news spreads quickly. Papers run headlines. Obituaries praise his military genius. The slapping incident is mentioned but downplayed. He is, in death, what he always wanted to be in life. A legend. His funeral is military, precise, honored. He is buried in Luxembourg, among the soldiers of the Third Army, in a grave that looks like all the others. No grand monument. No towering statue. Just a white cross, identical to thousands in a field of identical crosses. Some say this is fitting. That Patton, for all his ego, was still a soldier, and soldiers rest together. Others say it is ironic. That a man who saw himself as singular, as destined, ends in uniformity. But the story does not end with his burial. Because Patton's life raises questions that echo far beyond the 1940s. Questions about ambition. About the price of greatness. About what we are willing to excuse in exchange for results. There is no question that Patton was a military genius. His understanding of armored warfare, his instinct for speed and aggression, his ability to inspire men to do the impossible, these are documented and undeniable. The Third Army's record speaks for itself. More ground covered, more enemy soldiers captured, more objectives achieved in less time than almost any other unit in the European theater. But genius does not grant immunity from morality. And this is where we must reckon with the harder truths. Patton's relentless pursuit of glory came at a cost that cannot be measured in miles or medals. Men died in attacks that served more to boost Patton's reputation than to achieve necessary objectives. Soldiers were driven past the point of endurance not because the mission required it, but because Patton's ego demanded it. The slapping incidents are often dismissed as a man of his time, a relic of old-fashioned military discipline. But they were more than that. They were a window into how Patton saw the men under his command. Not as individuals with their own fears and trauma, but as tools. As instruments of his will. When a tool broke, he did not seek to repair it with compassion. He discarded it with contempt. And yet, soldiers followed him. Many with devotion. They gave him the nickname Old Blood and Guts, though some whispered that it was our blood and his guts. They respected his courage, his refusal to ask them to go anywhere he would not go himself. They knew that when Patton led an attack, he believed in it absolutely. There was no hesitation, no doubt. And in the chaos of war, that certainty was a lifeline. So we are left with complexity. A man who was both inspiring and cruel. Brilliant and reckless. A leader who won battles and broke spirits. And perhaps this is the most honest way to understand him. Not as a hero. Not as a villain. But as a human being given enormous power and driven by appetites that power only magnified. Because power does not create character. It reveals it. And what Patton's power revealed was a man who believed the rules did not apply to him. Who thought his destiny was more important than the lives of those around him. Who could not distinguish between self-confidence and narcissism, between determination and obsession. There is a philosophy, old as civilization, that great men are beyond normal judgment. That their contributions to history earn them a kind of moral exemption. That we should overlook their cruelties because of their achievements. This philosophy is seductive. It allows us to celebrate the victories without mourning the cost. To build statues without asking who paid for the pedestal. But history is not kind to this philosophy. Because every empire built on such logic eventually crumbles. Every leader who believed himself above accountability eventually falls. And the men and women who suffer under such leaders, they do not care about destiny or legacy. They care about going home. About seeing their families again. About living. Patton believed he was a warrior from the ancient world, reborn to lead armies and reshape history. And in a way he was right. Not because of reincarnation, but because he embodied something ancient and unchanging in human nature. The hunger for glory. The willingness to sacrifice others for personal ambition. The belief that might makes right and that the strong are entitled to rule. These impulses are not unique to Patton. They echo through history. In conquerors and tyrants, in CEOs and politicians, in anyone who confuses their own success with virtue, their own desires with destiny. Patton is a mirror. And what we see in that mirror is uncomfortable because it is familiar. We live in a world that still celebrates the ruthless, that admires the driven, that tells stories of men and women who succeed by any means necessary and calls them inspirational. We build companies and countries on the idea that some people are simply better, more deserving, more important. And we are often willing to overlook how they treat others as long as the results are impressive. Patton's life asks us to examine that willingness, to question whether results justify methods, to consider the difference between leadership and domination. Because true leadership does not require breaking the people you lead. It does not demand that you see yourself as superior, as chosen, as beyond the constraints that govern ordinary humans. True leadership recognizes that power is a responsibility, not a right. That the lives entrusted to you are precious, not expendable. That glory means nothing if it is built on the graves of those who trusted you. Patton never learned this. Or perhaps he learned it and rejected it because it conflicted with the story he told himself. The story of the eternal warrior, the man of destiny, the one who would be remembered when all others were forgotten. And he was right about one thing. He is remembered. His name appears in history books and documentaries. His tactics are studied in military academies. His quotations are repeated, often by people who have never known war but like the sound of aggressive confidence. But what should we remember? The brilliance of the Third Army's advance, yes. The breaking of the Bulge, absolutely. But also the slapped soldiers. The driven men who died in unnecessary attacks. The arrogance that could not accept limits or consequences. All of it. The whole truth, not the comfortable myth. Because myths are easy. They let us admire without thinking. They give us heroes without complexity. But the truth is harder and more valuable. The truth is that Patton was a man of extraordinary talent and extraordinary flaws, and that his pursuit of power reveals as much about us as it does about him. We are drawn to stories of domination, of conquest, of men who reshaped the world through force of will. These stories make us feel small and inspired at the same time. Small because we are not them. Inspired because we imagine we could be. But the cost of such ambition, the human wreckage it leaves behind, that part we often ignore. We focus on the triumph and forget the trauma. Patton could not have achieved what he did without the thousands of men who followed him, who drove the tanks and walked the miles and bled in the mud. Their names are mostly forgotten. They do not have biographies or films. They were the blood to his guts. And any honest accounting of his legacy must include them. It must include the young private, shaking in a hospital, who was struck instead of comforted. It must include the lieutenant who died in a pointless skirmish, wondering why they were still pushing. It must include every soldier who achieved the impossible because Patton demanded it, and who paid a price that Patton never had to count. This is not to diminish the very real evil that Patton fought against. The Third Reich was a horror that needed to be stopped. The soldiers who landed on beaches and marched across Europe were engaged in a necessary and just fight. And leaders like Patton, for all their flaws, played a role in that victory. But necessity does not erase nuance. Justice and cause does not justify every action. And we can acknowledge the good that was done while still questioning the methods and motives of those who did it. The landscape of modern memory is littered with half-truths and convenient omissions. We want our history simple. Good guys and bad guys. Heroes and villains. But life is not simple, and neither is history. Patton stands at the intersection of courage and cruelty, genius and ego, service and selfishness. He is a reminder that human beings are not one thing or another, but many things at once, often in conflict. And perhaps that is the final lesson. That we must be wary of anyone who claims to be beyond question. Who insists that their vision is so important that any price is worth paying. Who confuses confidence with wisdom, aggression with strength, reputation with worth. Power attracts such people. It always has. And it is easy, especially in times of crisis, to hand them authority and hope they will save us. But power in the hands of the unaccountable is dangerous, no matter how talented the person wielding it. Patton believed he was accountable only to history, only to the judgment of ages. But history is written by survivors, and the survivors include the people damaged along the way. Their voices matter. Their stories count. And any legacy that ignores them is incomplete. The cold room where this story began, the place where history turned, is not a battlefield or a command post. It is wherever we decide what kind of leaders we will follow, what kind of behavior we will excuse, what kind of world we will build. Patton's war is over. The Third Army has been disbanded for decades. The tanks are in museums. The soldiers, those who survived, have grown old and passed on. But the questions remain. What do we owe to those who lead us? What do they owe to us? How much should we sacrifice for someone else's vision of glory? And when does determination become obsession, confidence become arrogance, leadership become tyranny? These are not historical questions. They are present questions. Because the impulses that drove Patton, the hunger for recognition, the belief in personal destiny, the willingness to use others as means to an end, these have not disappeared. They appear in boardrooms and political campaigns, in social movements and personal relationships. Wherever there is power, there is the temptation to abuse it. Wherever there is ambition, there is the risk of losing sight of everything else. Patton's life does not provide easy answers. It provides a warning. A case study in what happens when talent is untethered from empathy, when skill is divorced from humility, when the pursuit of legacy overrides the value of life. He wanted to be remembered. And he is. But perhaps not in the way he imagined. Not as a flawless warrior god, but as a flawed human being who achieved great things and caused great harm, often in the same breath. And maybe that is the truest form of memory. Not the statue or the myth, but the complicated, uncomfortable, fully human truth. The sun sets over the fields of Luxembourg where Patton rests. The white crosses stretch in perfect rows, silent witnesses to the cost of war. Visitors come, sometimes to pay respects. They stand by his grave and think about courage and sacrifice. Some see a hero. Some see a cautionary tale. Both are right. Because the shocking truth behind Patton's relentless pursuit of power is that there is no single truth. There is only the endless complexity of a human life, magnified by circumstance and choice, recorded by history and judged by each generation anew. We cannot change what happened. We cannot bring back the men who died or undo the harm that was done. But we can choose what we learn. We can choose to see clearly, to judge fairly, to remember completely. And we can choose in our own lives to pursue excellence without cruelty, to lead without dominating, to achieve without destroying, to be remembered not just for what we accomplished, but for how we treated the people along the way. That choice, more than any battle, more than any conquest, is the true measure of a life. And it is a choice we make every day in small ways and large, in times of peace and times of crisis. Patton made his choices. History records them. And now, standing in the cold room where the echoes of his voice have finally faded, we must make ours. The story ends where it began. With a question. Not about Patton but about ourselves. What will we do with the power we are given? How will we be remembered? And when the final accounting comes, when the medals and the headlines fade, what will remain? Perhaps only this. That we were human. Flawed and striving. Capable of greatness and capable of failure. And that in the end, the only glory that matters is the kind that does not require someone else's suffering. The room is cold. The walls are silent. And the choice is ours.